Dark Future is a post-apocalyptic universe that was created by Games Workshop during the late 1980s. The setting for Dark Future takes place within an alternate timeline that diverged from our own during the United States presidential elections of 1960. In the Dark Future timeline, Richard Nixon would be elected as president instead of John F. Kennedy, due to Kennedy being caught having an affair with Marilyn Monroe. Under Nixon's leadership, America would begin to see a period of peace and stability due to the president's popular yet authoritarian regime. A series of legal and ethical regulations regarding industry and pollutants would also be revoked by Nixon, leading to not only an unprecedented advance in technological development, but also a substantial increase in global pollution, which resulted in the extinction of many species of flora and fauna. As a result, North America would be affected by drastic climate change, tainting the water supplies of the Midwestern United States and transforming most of the continent into little more than a vast arid desert by the onset of the 1970s, with this desert eventually becoming known informally as the Des. This would lead to the rise of various gang cults across America, turning the expanse of the Des into little more than a massive battlefield. The violence caused by these gang cults would continue to grow greater and greater in its intensity, and by 1985 the government was forced to introduce the Enderby Amendment, opening law enforcement to private contractors and bounty hunters that would become known formally as the Sanctioned Ops. This amendment would later be supplemented by the Moral Rearmament Drive, introduced by President Heston, in a bid to recreate the United States Cavalry to patrol the roads that crisscrossed the Des. Many communities would hire a number of these sanctioned operatives to protect them from bandits, escort supply convoys, or simply to hunt down raiders. Sometime between 1995 and 2025, the major cities of the United States would be divided into zones controlled by law enforcement, known appropriately enough as policed zones or PZs, and lawless regions known as no-goes for at least a decade. Much of the political power that exists across the world no longer belongs to a country's respective government, but instead to major corporations, and slavery would be re-legalized, being known by the term of indentured labor. The global media would also appear to be controlled by a singular organization, known as the ZBC, which would do little more than spout lies and propaganda, such as by claiming that indentured laborers are not slaves, or that whales were not rendered extinct due to global pollution. Despite the claims of the ZBC that would tell their audience otherwise, the world of Dark Future is one of dystopian horror. But what links, if any, could Dark Future have with Warhammer 40,000? Initially, Dark Future was designed with no connections to Warhammer 40,000 in mind, due to both franchises being in their infancy at the time. However, this would change in 1990 with the first publications of the Dark Future novel series, which feature a number of references to chaos, the warp, and demonic entities. While the game was originally set in 1995, the second edition publication of the novels and the Blood Red States video game have retconned this for the setting to instead be the year of 2025. Because of this change made to the game's setting, it has been suggested that Dark Future takes place at an earlier point in the Warhammer 40,000 timeline, prior to the onset of events such as the Age of Strife and the Dark Age of Technology. This possibility is partially supported with a few passages from the Dark Future novels, the first of which comes from the novel Demon Download, which details that the laws of physics are slowly becoming undone, which could be tied to the warp beginning to grow more and more volatile over time.
Father O'Shaughnessy presented a paper charting the increasing instance of physical anomalies and the apparent breakdown of the laws of physics, and dropped a few dark hints about the eternal balances of space and time and their possible fragility.
The second piece of potential supporting evidence comes from the following excerpt taken from the novel Crocodile Tears,
Time had no meaning in the darkness, but the entire span of terrestrial history was but a brief armistice in the war between the three shades of dark and the forces of nullification.
The darkness being described within this passage could be a reference to the warp. If this were indeed the case, then the three shades of dark that were detailed could be the chaos gods of Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle. These three particular gods have been mentioned a few times throughout the Dark Future novels. Within Demon Download, the character of Durok would describe a list of godlike entities that existed within the various cultures of humanity, such as Anubis, Quetzalcoatl, the Devil, and many others. The Chaos Gods of Khorne and Nurgle are also detailed in this list of entities described by Durok. Since Slaanesh is not referenced in any way, it is possible that the events of Dark Future do indeed take place early on within the Warhammer 40,000 timeline, due to the fact that Slaanesh would not awaken to full consciousness until the fall of the ancient Eldari Empire, which occurred sometime between late M29 and early M30. In addition, there is evidence to support the possibility that a number of cults dedicated to the Chaos Gods would begin to emerge within the United States around the year 2025. The Dark Future Core rulebook details that while the older religions are still being practiced by the wealthy elites who reside within locations that can afford a greater deal of security and safety, various cults dedicated to a new church would begin appearing within the various no-goes. These cults that followed the faith of the new church were notorious for practicing human sacrifice and mutilation in hopes that such actions would bring about change within society. A number of these cultists depicted would display as a sign of their new religion the 8-pointed star of Chaos Undivided. Given that the gods of Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch have been referenced within the Dark Future novels and later within the Blood Red States video game, then this would appear to be a more deliberate and intended connection as opposed to being a simple Easter egg. Another piece of potential evidence that could confirm Dark Future as being a part of the Warhammer 40,000 timeline comes from the novel Golgotha Run. A UFO known simply as the Artifact is uncovered from beneath the surface of the Earth. This UFO is hypothesized to be the void-faring equivalent of an aircraft carrier, and when the craft's name is translated into English from an unknown language, the ship is stated to bear the literal designation of Hammer of God. This name could be a potential mistranslation, which means that the ship could instead bear the name of something akin to Godhammer or Demon Hammer in this regard. Given that Godhammer is also the name of a particular pattern of lascannon, with this pattern in particular being notable for their use on the land raiders of the Adeptus Astartes, it's certainly theoretically possible that an Imperial ship could also bear a similar such designation. If this UFO is indeed an Imperial vessel of some kind, then it's certainly a distinct possibility that the ship had somehow vanished within the depths of warp space, only to have travelled thousands of years back in time before crashing into the surface of Terra. The ship's wreckage would then slowly be buried over the course of decades, centuries, or even millennia before being discovered in 2025. As reiterated within the novel Crocodile Tears, time had no meaning in the darkness. The idea of the warp sending ships backwards in time is not unprecedented, as one of the most infamous examples of this occurring is detailed within the 4th edition Orc Codex with War Grizzluts. Grizzluts' fleet would enter the warp only to re-emerge at a point prior to his departure. The Orc war boss would then encounter his doppelganger before murdering him so he could have an additional copy of his favourite gun. Not only this, but Dark Future Blood Red States would also make references to technology found within Warhammer 40,000. One type of laser weapon that vehicles are able to equip is described as firing a melter beam, and one of the grenade launchers is stated to fire salvos of crack grenades, referencing melter weaponry and crack explosives utilized by Imperial soldiers in Warhammer 40,000. Although in Blood Red States, melter and crack are treated as being something akin to a brand name, sporting registered trademarks. If this was indeed the case, then this would suggest that the brands of melter and crack would become the catch-all term used to describe later variations of such weaponry, similar to how today within the UK and Ireland the term hoover is somewhat synonymous with vacuum cleaner. While the events of Dark Future do indeed appear to take place before those of the current setting of Warhammer 40,000, it is admittedly unlikely that Dark Future itself is part of the exact same universe due to its nature of being an alternate history. However, even if Dark Future is in itself a distinctly separate universe, it would still be connected to the Warhammer 40,000 universe via the warp. As documented within the June 2018 edition of White Dwarf magazine, in the Ask Grombrindal segment, the warp is connected to multiple universes, including that of 40k and Age of Sigmar, with the entities of the warp being multiversal singularities, explaining as to how beings such as the Chaos Gods and their demonic minions can affect all universes that are connected to it.
The Chaos question. I am already sort out my contracts, I don't have that answer them. Anywho, the realm of chaos is a mystical place that spans all of existence, stretching across dimensions and time, sometimes called the realm of chaos, sometimes the warp, Empyrean, Immaterium, Formless Waste, Land of Lost Souls, or simply the Abyss. It's all pretty much the same thing. In Warhammer 40,000, it is said that Slanesh was created by the Eldarli. After his, or her, creation, Slanesh was then freed and journeyed across that realm of chaos, where he, or she, crafted a realm of pleasure in excess in which to dwell. From this point on, Slanesh could send his, or her, minions, be they mortal or demonic, to the world that was, or now, the mortal realms, and countless other places. Seeing as how similar the elves are to the Eldarli, it's no wonder that Slanesh took such an interest in them.
There has even been documented evidence to support the possibility of beings from one material universe traveling to another via the warp, as detailed with the following quote from the short story Kaldor Draigo, Knight of Titan.
I see an old world beyond the next horizon. A world that likely never was, where sorcery blew in the very winds, and a self-made god-king was all that stood against the ruinous powers. Mayhap I would find the answer there, if I could find it at all.
The self-made God King and the world that likely never was that Draigo describes are clear references to not only the God King Sigmar, who was indeed a man that would become a God King, but also the remains of the Warhammer fantasy world, which would be known in Age of Sigmar as the world that was. As such, this not only explains the existence and influence of the Chaos Gods within the Dark Future universe, but that, potentially, if the universe is truly separate from Warhammer 40,000, then a ship that vanishes during its journey through the warp could potentially end up within the past of the Dark Future. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.